know if you saw Live the Experiment this past weekend, but Maureen was on it, so, and I will watch it, my husband, and then I will talk to the TV and when Maureen's speaking, and I'll say, no, I agree with that, yes, I agree with that, no, I think Maureen's not right about that, so hopefully we'll be on together sometime so we can do it in person. Okay, so I had planned to give a particular talk about this election, but then, of course, the Democratic Party nominee changed. So, the question is, are the fundamental issues that people who are not highly partisan might consider in their vote, have those issues changed with Kamala Harris at the head of the ticket as opposed to Joe Biden? And I think the argument among the conventional talking heads and political scientists really is that the fundamentals have not really changed with this change at the top of the Democratic ticket. And I'll explain what I mean in the next part of my remarks. I want to first start with how is it that political parties can change their presidential nominee in a day? How does that happen? And was it actually easier to do because Kamala Harris was vice president and that the campaign for the Democrats had registered as the Biden-Harris campaign with the Federal Election Commission? So, and Maureen has written books on political parties, but I will just give you a quick summary. Political parties have and continue today to control their nomination process. It is not the government that does this. It is not federal law even that does this. Political parties control their selection process. Where it becomes a federal issue is campaign finance. And that's the difference. And the reason that these two entities, government regulation of campaign finance, which really only vigorously starts in the early 1970s with the creation of the FEC, the Federal Elections Campaign Act. Before that, political parties, as you know, if you came to my lecture some years ago, really start in earnest at a mass level with Andrew Jackson in 1828 and then again in 1832. Parties were state-based entities. They were always state-based entities. And they were people seeking power. That is why they formed. That is what keeps them together. So when we think about that, the history of parties would be different, what you call groups or factions vying to win elections to control municipal power, state power, and then eventually federal power. But state governments were more powerful for the vast majority of our history than the federal government, which really only becomes very powerful starting in the 1930s. So for political parties, how they chose their nominee was really entirely up to them. And they only began to get government sanction or government authority or legitimacy when party machines developed, which was that a political party would control the municipal, usually a city government. And by saying, if you vote for me, you get this job. If you vote for me, there weren't very many contracts in those days, but you will have access to whatever federal public dollars. That's called machine politics. I think everybody in Rhode Island or Massachusetts knows what machine politics is. And you can see this today with one-party dominance in Rhode Island and one-party dominance in Massachusetts, that the party and the government seem as if they are one, but they are not technically one. So changes in ballot access, whether we have a referenda or initiative, whether you can recall people who are elected to office, that funnels through state legislatures, which are controlled by political parties. Whether we have a primary, when we have the primary is entirely a party nominating mechanism But the government, the state government, passes the law or the board of elections or the Secretary of State that says when these elections will happen. So over the last, particularly the last 100 years, the functionality of government as an overseer of political parties has disappeared. Political parties have captured, in a lot of ways, the mechanisms by which we participate in elections. So that's a whole story in and of itself. And there are proposals like ranked choice voting or non-partisan primaries in some states. Maine has ranked choice voting, for example. California has a non-partisan primary. If anybody's from California or wants to talk about that, they can in the Q&A. It is not clear to me that is a good thing for democracy, to have a non-partisan primary. It sounds like it would be good to bridge divides, but it doesn't actually work that way, at least in California. So, can the Democratic Party make any change that it wants? Yes. Does it also have to recognize state ballot access laws? Yes. And that is what the truncation of this is all about for the Democrats. Because most states, but not all, complete their ballots, literally, who's going to be on the ballot, by early August, with some exceptions. Believe it or not, Arizona just moved its primary back, but it used to have one in August. Pretty hot in Arizona to vote in August. And Kansas and a number of other states have their primaries very late. So in order to meet particularly Ohio's ballot deadline, the Democrats have already decided to make their nomination process virtual. Instead of waiting till next week, because that would have been past the Ohio deadline, and Joe Biden would not have made the deadline. He would have been on the ballot in Ohio. The governor of Ohio, Republican Mike DeWine, who was also a former U.S. Senator and Lieutenant Governor, he wanted to get that fixed, but the Ohio legislature refused to change the deadline. But Andrew Jackson, in order to secure the nomination of the Democratic Party in 1828, said, you don't have to come to Washington to pick your nominee. You can do it in your state capitals. You can do it in the state legislature. So when you think about having to be in the same place in order to nominate a presidential candidate, that is not written in stone. It is not necessarily a requirement of the tradition of party nomination processes. The Democrats will convene in Chicago next week. And I'll talk a little bit about what the risks are for them in that, for people who remember or know about the 1968 Democratic Party convention in Chicago. So we'll talk about that. So that is why the argument that was put forth initially when Kamala Harris, when Joe Biden said, I'm not running again, and Kamala Harris, he supported her, and she declared, and then lots of delegates to the convention said, we will support Kamala Harris, when they in fact ran in primaries for Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee for president. But because Biden and Harris were linked on the campaign documentation, that means that the $96 million that the Biden-Harris campaign had in the bank, literally, could transfer immediately to Kamala Harris. So we can talk about whether Joe Biden purposely waited as long as he did, or whether they knew that could be an option all along. We can talk about that in Q&A. So that's the legality of this switch. The Republicans had a perfectly traditional process where the president announces a little bit before the convention who the VP will be, and the VP is nominated, unanimously or by, acclamation at the convention. And that, of course, is J.D. Vance, Senator from Ohio, who, by the way, can keep his seat if he loses the election. So many people do this. Roy Benson, Joe Lieberman, lots of people keep their seats when they're running as U.S. senators. So what is it? What did this shift do to the nature of the choice? And we'll talk about identity politics, ideology, and issues. For identity politics, we go on the Democratic side from a white man of what might be described as an older cohort to a woman who is now being declared young at the age of 59. I personally find that satisfying. I know 59 makes you feel like, oh, 59, okay, 60, not so bad. So that's interesting to me, and as I said, somewhat encouraging just in terms of age. Certainly a woman of what we call mixed descent, mixed racial ethnic descent, South Asian. That will matter a little bit in some communities if we think about the voting patterns, and self-identified Black of originally Jamaican descent. And obviously a woman. I think my first speech here was in 2016. Right? Was it 2016? Because I know that Joe and Sally hosted something afterwards, and I think it was a Hillary Clinton Trump race. Yeah, and then we had some heated conversations after that. So, what is there a difference between Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton just in gender identity politics? There's, I think, two fundamental differences. One is pre-existing opinion of Kamala Harris. It may have been negative, her approval ratings weren't that high, like in the high 30s, maybe low 40, out of 100, but they were not deep. People, I don't know if I like her, I don't know much about her, but they were not deep. It wasn't like, boom, you ask about Kamala Harris and you get an immediate negative reaction. You get sort of a lukewarm, I don't know about her, not much, I don't know much about her, or I don't like her. But not the visceral anti-Hillary Clinton reaction that you got in 2016, at least, if not 2008. The baggage level for Hillary Clinton was far heavier than it is for Kamala Harris. Just in terms of individual perception. Intertwined with what we call intersectionality, gender, race, nationality. So, does that mean she will get all women to vote for her? No, not at all. Does it mean that people do not harbor doubts about her? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the obstacle to bringing anybody who was undecided or did not want to vote for Donald Trump to voting for her is not as difficult, not as severe as it was for Hillary Clinton with that kind of baggage. The parallels are her husband now was married before and then recently publicly owned up to having an affair while he was married. That obviously was a huge deal for Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and even though it was many years afterwards that she was the nominee, it still stuck with her. How could you stay with him? Or why didn't either yes, you should have stayed with him, we're happy about that, or why did you stay with him, how could you be humiliated that way? Kamala Harris wasn't with her husband when this happened, and therefore she doesn't have to answer those questions. And why is that important? Because her sweet spot for women is probably between the ages of 24 and 45. Of women who care about reproductive rights, whether they're independent, libertarian, Republican, or Democrat, but they care about reproductive rights, and they might be inclined to vote for a woman who's championing reproductive rights, but they may not have rejected someone like Hillary Clinton given the relationship that she had and Bill Clinton's behavior. So I don't know if this new revolution will hurt her, but you can see where it's just an easier lift to at least get some attention from this group and not face that sort of, I will never vote for Hillary Clinton. There is the obstacle that Democrats, I think, still have to, they won't do this, but I do think independent voters would like to know why Joe Biden didn't step aside a month or two earlier and give the Democrats a chance to really figure out who they wanted as their nominee. both Democratic Party voters, with the rest of the country to get to know Kamala Harris much better than they did. So I think those are reasonable questions to ask. So that's the gender. Ideology. Kamala Harris is a bit of, a little bit of a mystery on ideology. She was a prosecutor, and when she ran for Attorney General, she did well in California with the prosecutor reputation. But when she ran for Senate, here are two things I think that may or may not affect her campaign. One, that African-American black groups and progressives did not like her because they felt that she put too many people in jail and that blacks were disproportionately likely to go to jail in mass incarceration. So they were not vocally supportive of Kamala Harris. Her biggest rival in the nonpartisan primary in California was another Democratic woman, I believe Loretta, their sisters, Loretta and Lynn, I think it was Loretta Sanchez, and they had built a powerful Democratic machine out of the Los Angeles area among Latinos in California. And so they had really tried to damage Kamala Harris with Latino and Latino voters. Now, it was way back when she got elected to the Senate, not way back, more than a decade, but nonetheless, Kamala Harris probably has work to do in the Latino community. And that will affect prospects in Nevada and in Arizona and increasingly in North Carolina and Georgia. So this is another interesting thing, which is why ideologically she's been forceful on an issue of reproductive rights. But if somebody were to tell me she's super liberal, I'm not sure where you get that from. Her voting record in the Senate is like any other Democrat. She was a member of the Judiciary Committee, and actively so. She did not actively try to pass women's legislation, social welfare legislation. That's not the committee assignment she sought, and that's not what her reputation was. So this will be interesting as the Biden label. The Republicans will do a lot of this, where they are, is transferring that liberal label to Kamala Harris. What you saw when she selected Walz, how to pronounce it, the governor of Minnesota, was that the Republicans immediately branded him super liberal, super progressive, because they couldn't actually do the same thing to Kamala Harris as easily. And so when they're trying to get specifically white, male and female independents to vote Republican, they want people to be scared of Walz. They want him to say, now I have been to Minnesota. I don't know if you know people from Minnesota. Have you ever met anybody from Minnesota that scared you? I have not. Hubert Humphrey was a pretty good, obviously there were very dramatic circumstances for Hubert Humphrey to be a vice president, but he ended up being a pretty good vice president, pretty not so great presidential candidate in 1968. Walter Mondale was a very good vice president, not such a good presidential candidate in 1984. Minnesotans make pretty good VPs. So this is interesting to me to think about the role of ideology for that slice of voters that is still up for grabs. And when I say that, I mean, would somebody who says they do not want Donald Trump to be president of the United States, if they are that small slice of Republicans, and it's a small slice, Republicans come home to their nominee, a small slice that may stay home, or do they say to themselves, maybe not in Rhode Island necessarily, do they say to themselves, I want to make sure Donald Trump doesn't win, therefore I will vote for Kamala Harris? I doubt it. I think partisanship is fairly entrenched. But if the race is very, very close, and you happen to live in a state like Florida, where abortion, although it's a little bit convoluted now, will be on the ballot in Florida, which makes that state a little bit less secure for the Republicans, you might think, I'm going to do this, and I can live with it. That's exactly where Kamala Harris and Walz want you to be, that you can live with it. And the Republicans want to make sure that you believe you can't live with it. So That's in the issue areas. The issues are the same. To anybody who just came back from the holiday in Rhode Island, went to the beach today, maybe voting, maybe not, voters start to pay attention now. I think the extraordinary nature of the contest between Trump and Biden really gave a much bigger window of attention than we usually have. But they're going to be paying attention, and it's still the same. Inflation, capacity to buy a house and raise your children in a good, safe area with good, safe schools. The border and immigration is still a very strong and resonant issue everywhere. And and reproductive choice. And the peril for the Republicans, if you think about it, is that some states, like Kansas, like Ohio, that are red at the presidential level, voted affirmatively and strongly to protect a certain window to terminate a pregnancy. A window, not 6 weeks, and certainly not a ban. Most of America is between 15 and 20 weeks in their support, except for those states that have outlawed it, essentially. Most Americans, if you give them some sort of choice in a window, more would say 15 weeks, but there's still a slice that would say 15 to 20 weeks. So that will be a particular challenge for the ticket for the Republicans. Trump did a very good job of getting this taken care of. He said, I'm not going to do a national ban. It's decided. We'll leave it to the states. I don't care. I'm not doing anything else on it. And he was criticized by some of the strongly pro-life portions of his party. But he said, I don't care. That's my position. But then he picked Vance. And J.D. Vance went a little off the ranch, a little rogue. And, it's clear that if he were to become president, that policy position would not stay. And now you have a 78-year-old, which is not that old, but only a couple years younger than Biden, 78-year-old president and a much younger, 39, soon to be 40-year-old VP. What are the chances statistically that the Republican VP would become president? They're greater than whether the Democratic candidate will become president. And he's 60, the Democratic VP candidate. You could say, does he look a little older? Maybe, but he's 60. And that becomes, if you think about a race decided by 8,000 votes in Georgia, or 11,000, 10,000 votes in Arizona, that can make a difference. And that is where the micro-targeting, and we can talk lofty policy areas, but micro-targeting of particular groups in particular states is what will win or lose this election. And that's something we don't get a lot of in Rhode Island, but because of our small size, but also our political leanings. But you can certainly, if you go up to New Hampshire, if you go up there or you know people there, you're going to see a lot of micro-targeting in New Hampshire. Will Kamala Harris sell in New Hampshire? It all depends on what she says about taxes. I mean, that's just what we know about New Hampshire. It leans blue, but there's a deep well of Trump support in New Hampshire. So I'm going to stop and open it up for questions, and I want to leave you, before I do that, with a quick little guide. What are we watching? What am I watching? One thing that we know, a couple things we know. As I said before, Republicans come home on election day. They may gripe and grouse and complain, but they, in terms of the percentage of Republicans that turn out, is higher most of the time, with the exception of 2012 under Mitt Romney candidacy, than the percentage of registered Democrats that turn out. The reason Democrats can win is that there are more self-described Democrats. There are more registered Democrats nationally. So that's one thing to remember. Black voters vote for the Democratic candidate for president. The lowest that number has ever gotten, depending on who you believe, 87% of registered black voters vote for the Democratic Party. So but the polling had shown a significant and consistent erosion among black men, older and younger, for Joe Biden. Erosion meaning not excited, not getting out the door. I'll give you just a few statistics. Hillary Clinton in 2016 in Milwaukee, black turnout was down 4%. In Detroit, it was down somewhere around 8%. In Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, it was down anywhere from 3 to 6%. That will swing an election. Especially in Wisconsin, that was flooded by 27,000 votes less in 2020. So, when you think about those numbers, the most recent polling among self-described black voters went from 72 or 74% for the Democratic nominee to close to 87 or 87% for Kamala Harris among black men. So, just as Republicans come home, black voters will come home, and there could be some diminishing of that in places like Detroit, where we have an overlap between opinions on Israel-Gaza and the black community. But black female voters always get out the door. 72% of all black women who are registered to vote. So if you up black turnout and get it back to Obama numbers, very hard to do. 64% black turnout in 2008 and 67% black turnout in 2012. If you get that high, you win. Even if you just get to 61% in a state like North Carolina with 1.1 million black voters, you can win. Again, targeting, micro-targeting, geography. The fundamentals of winning this campaign have not changed. And I think I'll stop there and take questions because you know I can always fill the time if there are no questions. So I know some people want to hear about the electoral college, but I'll guess.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of statistics. 10% of this, 8% of that. I think 100% of the people that buy groceries in this country are going to vote. And I think nearly 100% of the people that buy gasoline and fuel and energy are going to vote as well. What is your opinion on those voters?
It's interesting. There's some really good websites if you want to know what the percentage of turnout is in each state. It happens that with a combination of greater levels of poverty and lower levels of education, the Southeast, which actually has the most miles driven by any sector of the country, has the lowest turnout ratio. So your idea that people who buy gasoline and have to spend more money on gasoline because they drive more will vote in bigger numbers is not borne out by what we know about voting behavior. This is it's also the case that in those states, polling places are spread out. So you have to get to them, you have to drive to them, it becomes a little tougher to vote. This is not necessarily black voter suppression. Somebody could argue that it could be, but it goes back to Huey Long in the 1930s in the South, where politicians would make sure that uneducated and poor people stayed uneducated, stayed poor, and made it hard to vote. So it's not quite accurate, but it is true that if people believe, and I'm talking of any educational level, that prices will continue to go up under Kamala Harris, that may be the thing that says, I'm not voting for Kamala Harris, I'm voting for Donald Trump. The complication there, again, is by community by community by community. For example, in the Latino community, abortion is not super popular. That abortion, that there's more conservative religious belief in the Latino community, evangelical and Catholic. So abortion won't counter high prices for Kamala Harris in those communities, except for some particular pockets of certain people of certain nation of origin. So it's really literally an idea of who do you talk to about gasoline prices and who do you talk to about reproductive rights and who do you talk to about the border. And if the campaigns get it right, they can win. And that's true of the Republicans as well as the Democrats. And the Trump campaign folks know that. So the question is, can they keep their messaging consistent to particular communities? Stay on inflation, stay on the price of gas and the price of groceries and the border, and stay out of deciding somebody is black or not, deciding whether somebody is, I can stop there, but saying that women who don't have children don't deserve to be citizens. I mean, you do not need that when you need as Donald Trump needed 11,000 votes in Georgia. But I will tell you, I believe his campaign advisors are better trained, better on it, they understand what they have to do. They don't have to fight the same army that the Democrats do, but they know what they have to do, and they know how to do it. It's whether their principles can stay on message. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Yes.
Should J.D. Vance turn out to be more of a difficulty to Trump than he already appears, would it be possible for supporters of Trump to convince J.D. Vance to get very sick and retire from the race? If it were possible to convince J.D. Vance to retire from the race, then what happens? What are Donald Trump's options in choosing another vice presidential candidate?
So, J.D. Vance, if you watch or read J.D. Vance's problem, I'm not as persuaded that J.D. Vance is a liability among Republicans. Because I think for the core conservative Republicans who really have a particular ideology and really love Donald Trump and also want to see America return to some picture of 1955 America, or even 1985 America, where you maybe drove an American-made car, and you bought American-made clothes, and you believe that your children could stay in your town because the plants would still be there. Those are legitimate, I would argue, and powerful hopes. He does very well among those voters. So I don't see him as 100% liability at all for the vast majority of people who embrace that vision. The problem is I see him as a liability potentially for independent voters, particularly women independent voters, but also male independent voters with daughters. And so I think that's the thing for the Republicans is they can't dump him because he's motivating maybe people who aren't thinking great things about Donald Trump but want to vote Republican, and he's the future. And he is perceived to be a more sincere believer of all these policies than Trump, which is funny because a couple years ago he wasn't a believer in many of these policies. But he's perceived that way, and he's young, he's dynamic, he's charismatic, he's handsome. That, if they get rid of him, who do they get? Then you got Trump. And I think Trump without Vance, honestly, going into this next couple of months, is a greater liability than Trump with Vance. And the second point is, they can't change the ballot because the states will have approved all the ballots in 2 weeks. Now, can you do it this week and upend the press and take away the press from Kamala Harris next week, for example? Might be a pretty good idea, but you'd have to make sure Ohio will keep him on the ballot, and I think that deadline is passed in Ohio, and you have to be on the ballot if you're the Republicans in Ohio.
Right.
But, the Republican legislature in Ohio could say, hey, something happened, we'll put him on the ballot. I can't off the top of my head think of anybody except Marco Rubio who would be as successful to get out that Republican conservative base as J.D. Vance. Rubio would do much better among the independent voters, I think. He's in the debates, if you ever listen to what he was saying about the future of the economy, 4 places in America that have been left behind, he had very smart, innovative, forward-thinking ideas. He's Cuban, so nobody should assume I'm not Latino heritage. But you talk to Latino activists, Cuban does not mean Dominican or Puerto Rican or Guatemalan or Mexican. So people say, oh, he's Latino. It doesn't necessarily mean he brings lots of Latino votes with him. But that would be the only viable replacement. And I think it's too much of a risk. But he is Donald Trump. He could surprise us. Yes, sir, in the back. I'll go this side.
The past 4 years, the Republicans have worked very hard to get MAGA election officials into place to come up the works. Can they slow down the certification in the states enough to throw it to the House of Representatives?
In some states, it's possible that they can. North Carolina is a Republican supermajority, so that becomes an issue in North Carolina. Georgia, we know, will not do that. They will certify whatever the outcome is. This governor, Kemp, Brian Kemp, certainly would be running for president in 2028 if I had to put some money down. I don't think that's going to be problematic. The governor and Secretary of State of Arizona, I believe the Secretary of State, definitely the governor is a Democrat. So it won't happen in Arizona. In Pennsylvania, you have a Democratic Secretary of State and a Democratic governor. In Wisconsin, you have a Republican supermajority, but it's not as big a majority as North Carolina, and you have a Democratic governor. So I'm trying to think of the swing states. You do have a Republican governor in Nevada. So the Republican governor in Nevada could delay things. And in Michigan, you have a Democratic Secretary of State, Democratic legislature, and a Democratic governor. So if you think of the swing states and the probability of delay at the state level, which the state Secretary of State certifies, I can't see that happening where that would be powerful enough to deny Kamala Harris if she is convicted. I'm going to go back and forth. Yes.
On the same subject, do you see violence after the election?
I know, Maureen, you talked about this, and you said that your belief was if it was a big enough victory for Kamala Harris, let's say, and Walz, then unlikely to see lots of widespread violence, but that if it was a tight race, you suggested that, and I think that's right, that questions about voter accuracy, ballot accuracy, counting, just like we saw in 2020, will really foment dissent. But, you know, the federal government is now either charged or convicted, I think it's convicted now, more than 1,000 participants in January 6th riots. And I say riots because I believe they were riots. I don't believe everybody who went to January 6th was a rioter, but 1,000 people, and a good many of them have faced civil, financial penalties and gone to jail. I'm not sure how many widespread people want to do that. And so that is what keeps me from thinking that on a widespread basis, there would be a lot of violence. But I think the temperature is high, and I think that it will take every single person's effort, if you can, when you're faced with a question, you have a conversation, or somebody says something, or somebody sitting next to you saying something, to bring it down a notch and not overreact. Just, you know, let people tell you what they think. Because what drives frustration is the sense you're not being heard, or it's driven by hatred of the other side, negative partisanship. And if there is a time and a place where people can be heard, the second will be that the Republicans are likely to take the Senate back. It's the question of what the margin will be. And if it's just like 2020, when the Republicans were saying, we don't believe the election was fair, at the presidential level, but it's the same exact ballot that elected me, and I just got sworn in and I'm feeling fine. We've seen that movie before. I just don't think it'll be effective a second time. And I do think the Republicans will want to move forward. They could conceivably, believe it or not, they could conceivably win the House and the Senate and lose the presidency. It's very tight. It will be very tight in the House. The Senate, it's just tough. There are a couple, West Virginia's gone already. Montana, John Tester may be able to hold on, but it's tough. So if the Democrats can keep it 52 Republican, 48 plus independents, Democrat, that means that they can avoid, I think, a lot of political violence because the Republicans will declare victory.
The latest weather forecast app for 2023. This
Well, that's not my specialty in the sun. So the thing is that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, one of Alaska, one of Maine, Susan Collins, you could argue for independence on reproductive choice, fell down on the job a little bit. However, I'm not sure either one of them is seeking re-election, and they will probably thwart the worst of the legislative instincts of the most conservative wing of the party. John Cornyn or John Thune are both experienced politicians. John Thune from South Dakota, a little taller, one might suggest slightly better looking. John Cornyn, perfectly handsome guy from Texas, are longtime Republican senators who are conservative, who believe in the rule of law, who are pros. And one of them will be the majority leader. They are fighting against each other for that position. But neither one of them is still off the ranch that they want to take the Senate down with them. They will probably get rid of the filibuster, the Republicans, if there's a Republican president. But if there's a Democratic president, they're keeping the filibuster. But they're reasonable, conservative, long-time politicians. And when I say reasonable, they believe, as again, my term for reasonable is that you believe in the rule of law, that you accept the peaceful transfer of power, and that you don't try to bring down the entire federal government in your attempt to lower federal spending, reduce the deficit, and eliminate programs that are inefficient. That's my definition of quote-unquote reasonable. Not someone who agrees with me, but someone who believes that the debt ceiling, as painful as it is, has to be lifted because we make commitments when people buy our treasury bonds to pay them interest benefits back. So that's the scenario. So this is why watch the Republicans. No, finish soon. Watch the Republicans and watch where the money goes. September 30th is the last day of this quarter of fundraising. OpenSecrets.org has all of this in beautiful charts and tables in October. Look at the beginning of October and watch who's giving money to whom. My expectation is that you will see far more establishment money, Chamber of Commerce money, for example, even Koch brother, because David Koch passed away, Charles Koch, pushing money towards Senate races, pushing money towards winnable House races. Because they know that if they win even one of the chambers, or both, they'll stop most of the Harris Laws agenda. And in some ways, it's what we call Pareto optimal equilibrium for them. They don't have to deal with Trump, and he's chaotic. And the tariffs will hurt their businesses. But they get a blocking of any further expansion of the federal government. So watch what they're doing. Watch their fundraising. It's hard to watch it because it costs very dark money and secret. But there are ways to look at contributions, and they track all the contributions real time. You can go on any day of the week and see who's giving to whom. It'll say party, individual House member or senator, and who's giving the money.
That was OpenSecret.org.
OpenSecrets.org. Yeah. It used to be called the Center for Responsible Politics, and they merged. OpenSecrets.org. And you can track them. I'm going to go to the red shirt individual.
First of all, thank you. Second, in terms of simply procedural fairness, and you as a student of American politics, how worried are you about the suppression of the vote? Not just the black vote, but the suppression of the vote, but the black vote.
When we talk about voter suppression, we talk about, the active voter suppression are two things. One is purging the rolls. So people think they're registered to vote, they show up to vote, they haven't bothered to check, and they find out they've been purged because they didn't vote in a federal election 2 years ago. So it's about, every state is different. Every state has different rules. Georgia, for example, that same Brian Kemp who saved the Republic theoretically in 2020, he purged 53,000 voters, and 2/3 of them were black in 2018 and 2020. Actually, 2018 mostly. So 2020. And he did it as Secretary of State in 2018. And that is, if you don't, and every state has different law. If you vote in a state election, some states say you're good to go for the federal election. But if you haven't voted in a federal election, then it dies. Some people say you have to register every year. Some states say every 2. Every state is different. This is the biggest flaw in the Constitution. Biggest flaw, I think the biggest flaw besides slavery in the Constitution. So I'm worried about that, purging, particularly among lower educated voters, and I'm worried about physical intimidation. And I do think that the Harris campaign will have to rely not just on voting officials or police, because in some black communities, having police there is not going to make you feel more comfortable going to vote. You'll have to have community organizations that are out in force all day long and for early voting, and making sure that you're taken to the polls, you're taken home, there's ways to get there. There's Souls to the Polls, which is the big black church movement, really looking towards the community to guarantee access to voting, not law enforcement, at least on the Democratic side. But remember, Donald Trump needs everyone to vote too. And Donald Trump brought 10 million voters in 2016 with high school or less education. If you put up barriers that depress voter turnout among lower educated or low income neighborhoods, you're going to depress white turnout too. And he's discouraging mail-in happening. His party is desperate for him to stop saying that. And Democrats are very good at mail-in balloting, and places like Idaho, pretty red state Idaho, mail-in balloting. As you come from west to east, Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, California, Washington, Oregon, all mail-in balloting now. So this is a trend, and you get people who vote. So Republicans have to be careful what they wish for theoretically in terms of voter suppression. But I do think these two things, particularly the purging, right now is the most consequential for seeing some outcomes in elections. Okay, I have there was another gentleman. Yeah, right there, sir.
Can a convicted felon become president?
Yes. Yes. Maybe that the lawyers in the room can tell me this. They finished this document in 1787. This is the Constitution, and they sold it for 2 years before it was ratified. They did not pass the Federal Judiciary Act in 1791. As you know, James Wilson, who was a lawyer, wrote 2 volumes on what our judicial system should look like, and they passed several judiciary acts, but it was after they ratified the Constitution. You know, Article 3 is pretty small, little blurbs about the judiciary, but it's not. So they thought almost all adjudication would be state-based. And, you know, one of the reasons Hamilton relented, he didn't have a choice, on having 4-year terms was that if somebody was personally corrupt, you could get rid of them before they could do too much damage. I think what the Supreme Court said about immunity, I think if you really are looking at the literal belief of the Constitution, the founders believed that impeachment with special circumstances would be the way you could remove a president from office who would abuse their power. That it would be too easy for a popular figure to sway a jury. I mean, and they don't even have jury trial, you know, in the amendments they have jury trial. But, so that's why, yes, convicted felon, had the Republicans joined the effort and impeached him and added the special circumstance, he would be precluded. But I will tell you this, and I do believe this, I have made several bets, not of large amounts of money. But I believe Donald Trump, when or if he wins, he will on January 21st file to run again in 2028. He will file with the Federal Election Commission, and they will say you're constitutionally prohibited from running. They'll say, no, I'm constitutionally prohibited from serving. And you don't know that I won't get that amendment repealed in the next 4 years, so you have to let me raise money. And I think he would have a perfectly reasonable case. And then he would lean on the 21, 22 supermajority Republican state legislatures to pass repeal of the 22nd Amendment. But he still needs 38 states. So it would be hard. But here's where it would be persuasive. If his base is already so mobilized, they'll go along with that. And they'll make that their mission. And they'll make that the litmus test for the 26 midterm congressional elections in the primary. Will you support a third term for Donald Trump? And you can see where dominoes will fall in the Republican Party because they all flock back to him. And they will say yes. It is not, do not believe that if you are voting for Donald Trump, you are only voting for 4 years. Because he will do everything in his power, not to eliminate elections, federalism and the Constitution, I think, make that virtually impossible to do, but he will build enough viable, enthusiastic support for getting rid of term limits on the presidency that you never know. I have somebody over here, yes, sir, yeah.
Yes. I vote remember 2016 where a speaker just like you was in the audience or at the podium in the summer of 2016, and they made this incredible statement that Donald Trump was going to win the election, and everyone said, oh, not possible. But he surprised us. What surprises can we expect in the 2024 election? I'm not asking you for the winner, I'm just asking you for surprises coming up to the election.
forever abandoned predicting outcomes of presidential elections after 2016. There's a couple of, so I do think it would be surprising and not a good move to dump J.D. Vance, but I would be shocked. I would not be surprised at all if Donald Trump wins. This is a jump ball. It's 50-50. It's turnout. This is 50-50. I would be a little bit surprised if the Republicans failed to certify the election in the House. But I wouldn't be shocked. I can see that. It's January 6th. The new Republican Congress is in office. And that's what I mean. The Republicans think they can win the House. And if they win the House, 150 Republicans are now sort of on record as saying election deniers. 100 of them voted not to certify the last time. That caucus is 221 people. I can see them not certifying it. That would be somewhat surprising to me as an American to see that happen, but I can see it. The Senate will certify. People like Jim Lankford, very, very conservative Republican from Oklahoma, Murkowski, I can name 10, 12 Republicans who would certify. But I can see the House not certifying. And I don't know, genuinely, it goes to the court, it might go to the Supreme Court after that, I'm not quite sure. I do think the Supreme Court will certify it. I do, actually. Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh are vying to be the next Chief Justice. And they don't know who the President or the Senate, they don't know what the future holds. But they don't want to be so far outside the mainstream that they're not viable for that position when and if John Roberts leaves the court. So that's why I think it'd be a 6-3 vote to certify. But that's not a surprise, but everybody should be waiting for that. If the Republicans win the House, they have a decent majority. My guess is for electoral survival, they won't certify it.
Does that mean the current president, stays president until something is certified?
That is a very good question, and that would backfire on the Republicans. But they'd rather have Joe Biden at 81, to be blunt, or 82 at that point, than Kamala Harris at 59 or 60. But yes, there's no, January 20th is Inauguration Day. You don't certify, the president stays the president. It will take some doing, but there'll be so much electoral pressure within the Republican parties to say you believe Donald Trump should have won the election if he loses it, that they'll do that, and they'll hope somebody else saves the election. They'll just say, well, hope somebody else deals with that. With that, I don't think they'll show. So, yes, so back at it. Yeah.
Do you think that there will ever be serious effort to reduce the influence that money has on a political system?
Every effort that has been tried, starting with I've given a talk before here, I've talked about my second book on how senators were selected in state legislatures and how much bribery there was. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent to buy state legislative votes for senators. And then we adopted the 17th Amendment in 1913 to make senators directly elected by the people so that money would not distort the process behind closed doors in the state legislature. We spend billions of dollars on Senate elections. Every Democratic little d reform has backfired or failed. It's like tax reform. Really rich people have good accountants. They're going to figure this out. And the same is true for money. In politics, Citizens United, this is the cost of Citizens United. If Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse were here, he'd be speaking much more about this at length. The cost was a lack of accountability. So it used to be parties did have a hold on people, that if you wanted to win, when Nancy Pelosi started her career in 1987, you had to go through the Democratic Party elected leaders to get the donations. There were PACs, political action committees, but individual wealthy people could not give you more than maybe $100,000 or something. They legally couldn't do it. So you needed to toe the party line, you needed to be a good quote-unquote soldier for the party, and you needed to go along with the establishment party, or else you couldn't get money to run. Citizens United wiped it all out. The party inside the chamber now cannot control its members because it no longer controls the financing. And if you elect people people who don't care if bills pass, or don't care about policy, or care about reducing federal spending, then they don't have to care. Because nobody can hold them accountable anymore except the donors. And that's Citizens United. So I'm sorry not to be more optimistic, but the answer is no. Yes?
What can the average, ordinary Democrat do to make sure the election goes the right way?
I don't know that there is division, I think Republican or Democrat. The way to make sure that your side wins is to pump up the good outcome possibilities and downplay the bad outcome possibilities. And that's what Donald Trump on the Republican side has been trying to do, and that's what Kamala Harris has been trying to do. If you watch YouTube, you watch the Atlanta rally, you watch the Detroit rally, even the Arizona rally, she is projecting a form of optimism. Maybe it's the California thing, right? Ronald Reagan did a fantastic job of this in 1980 and 84, and maybe because the weather's so good. I have no idea. She hasn't lived there in 3 years. But all I know is she understands that people are exhausted from the vitriol on all sides. Democrats have a lot of vitriol within the party now. Republicans have a lot of vitriol directed at them if they're Trump supporters by a lot of people, or they're spewing it against Democrats. People are exhausted from it. And she is looking for that sweet spot that doesn't seem Pollyannish, but looks forward optimistic. Look, we're a better country than this, and we can come together and we can do it. A little bit of Obama without the self-congratulatory nature. And if you can adopt that tone, even with Democrats who may disagree with you, for example, in Israel-Gaza, one way or the other, you will generate the kind of enthusiasm. I mean, if you look, we have not seen that kind of enthusiasm in the Democrat Party since 2008. We just haven't seen it. And it's there. And it's with white middle-class male union people, it's with young black people, Latino people, women, men, anybody. There seems to be a lot of like, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that, if you're a Trump supporter, you want to really refocus on Trump. And the new Trump, the Trump that's disciplined, the Trump that showed up to the debate, the Trump that's been on message. And just tell people he had a bad 2 weeks. And that's the way both sides can do it. I think there is absolute fatigue among most voters. I think Trump people are generally energized and enthusiastic, and they're believers. I think the left foot is very unhappy, and I think they need to up the optimism on that side. If you're a Democrat, you need to up the optimism on that side. Because that's what people will get out and make sure they're registered to vote. And if you want to be active, make sure the people you know might vote the way you want them to on any side are registered to vote with an active registration. We all get the card from the Secretary of State. Don't ignore it. It tells you you're actively registered and where your polling places are. So if you haven't gotten that card, go on the website. It's really easy to do. The Secretary of State, check if you are actively registered. And tell everybody else to do that. And give, if you have money, you want to give it to Senate and House races. Look at people you like across the country, whatever the party, and give them some money. I have time for all the way to the back, and then this, right? And then you.
So given now what we know about Biden's health issues and how long they've been going on, who's running the country?
So a couple things. He did a CBS This Morning interview that aired on that show CBS This Morning on Sunday, and he had some trouble, a little bit of facial-like symptoms, but he knew everything he said was clear and spot on. I don't think he is mentally compromised. I think he's clearly physically compromised, and he admits to being physically compromised. Who's running the country? There are, I remember make sure I get this right, 2.4 million federal employees to start. The president doesn't run the country. The vast majority of the federal budget is entitlement spending and defense. It goes out the door no matter who says what and does anything. Who's making the security decisions? That would be his security team and himself at the end of the day, just like Donald Trump did at the end of his presidency. You need the president to say yes or no. People can't make those decisions themselves. But there is an entirely large, thick apparatus of decision makers that are running the country. So So I don't think he's at the point where he is mentally incompetent. And I think if that were the case, we would not know about it, per se. But I think you wouldn't see definitive action. He just approved the shipment of fighter jets to the Ukraine.
Yeah, bravo.
He just did it. That's the Defense Department, but it's also him. So he is continuing to do things, and I think that the country runs. The country runs, the federal government in particular runs. Let me get to your question, then I want to talk about Rhode Island government. We have a perfectly fine, physically healthy guy. Nobody knows where he is. So I'm more sure, I am genuinely worried. We've seen, this supermarkets are closing on the east side. People are losing money and businesses. The revival of the state of Rhode Island does depend on something to do with that bridge, and the governor seems to just walk away from it. So I think that is something to be much more worried about as the Rhode Island over the next couple months than Biden's mental health.
Camilla's made a statement that we have to do something about the borders, and she wants to do it, and seriously about it. She answered various questions. So they said, how can you say that? She said, you defended the president's statement right along. She said, I changed my mind. And this is very interesting. There's one of two things. She's legitimate, changed her mind. This could be a big statement going forward. I think Trump would be very nervous about this because this could change a lot of minds about her if she's going to make this a campaign issue, because this is mainly a Trump issue to do something about the war. You have a reaction on that statement that she's making?
I think people who are really worried about the border in places like Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, everywhere really. I think that people who believe that Biden administration failed to control the border, those are going to be tough people to persuade otherwise, because that's the most important issue to them. So I think it's really people who didn't think they were affected by the border, but now migrants are everywhere in the United States. So it's that population that says, wait a minute, this is not something we thought we had to deal with. This is not something we're worried about. Now it affects us, and we want to know what you're going to do about it. So I think that's the audience. President Biden has suspended the policy of allowing asylum seekers to come to the United States and stay while their claim is being processed. That is no, refugees are different. He has suspended that. That was the Biden administration policy, and 6.6 million or so asylum seekers came to America with that policy. That's a lot of people. He shut the border down on that now. You have to get asylum before you come over. If you come over seeking asylum, the United States will deport you rather quickly. You don't get a ticket and say, come back to court 2 years, see you later, called catch and release. So the Biden administration has a policy right now in place that Kamala Harris can defend people who are worried about the border. Right? So right now, she can say, I support the Biden administration policy because he changed the policy and he closed the border. So that's what she'll likely do. So somebody might say to her, will you open it up again if you're president? She's going to have an answer. My guess the answer will be not until we have processes in place to process the claims quickly and a place to put the people who are seeking asylum. That's what she'll say. And that fudges it. She doesn't use the word deportation. I mean, Donald Trump has said he's going to deport 11 million people. Sometimes it's 15 million, sometimes it's 11 million. Logistically, that is hard to do. I mean, not to mention the upheaval, but that's hard to do, and it scares people who come from communities that have suffered sort of roundups by government. So that's not a good rhetorical flourish for them, and he has to change that. I will tell you this, because I thought this would come up, and I'm going to end now, because it's nice out again. According to the United States Census, as of April of 2024, there are 45 million foreign-born individuals in the United States out of about 336 million people in April of 2024. 45 million foreign-born. How many entered before 2000? 49%. How many entered between 2000 and 2009 under George W. Bush? 24%. How many entered under 2010 or later? That's Obama, Trump, and Biden. 26.8%. Now, how many are not a U.S. citizen currently? 48%. How many are a naturalized U.S. citizen of those 45 million foreign-born? 52%. Professional employed, 63.5% are employed, 33% are not in the workforce. The professional education level, less than high school, 25%, high school, 22%, some college, 19%, college, 19%, graduate degree, 15%. What do they do? Mostly, it's split between service, construction, management, production, sales. That's the nature of who lives in the United States of America, who has come from somewhere else. You can make an argument that I think is a valid argument that under Biden, the percentage of people who are not U.S. citizens or, certified U.S. citizens has gone up because of the asylum seeking. I think that's a reasonable argument. Obama deported 2.4 million people in 8 years. He didn't have to catch and release. He had to get on the bus. You came over the border, you asked for asylum, he said, get on the bus, we'll take your name and number, and we'll call you. Literally, that's how Obama ran it. So, when we think about how many naturalized U.S. citizens there are, 52% of foreign-born or naturalized citizens who vote. What the Democrats don't understand is that if you've come here, quote-unquote, documented, with documentation or legally, you do not support undocumented immigration, and you are firm on that. There's not a lot of sympathy. The second thing Democrats don't get is that people who came here under amnesty or came here in the 1980s and then got amnesty, they don't support undocumented immigration. Their kids are third-generation born Americans, quote-unquote. So the Democrats overestimate the support among foreign-born people who can now vote for more liberal immigration policies. Republicans understand that those communities will not vote, will want to see a tighter border. So I think it's a very resonant issue. I think it's an important issue. I think it will matter a great deal in Arizona and Nevada, swing states. But right now, Kamala Harris has an answer. And the answer is, I will keep the current policy in place until we have these other policies and infrastructure in place to deal with asylum. And that's what she'll say. Whether you believe it or buy it or not, it is America. You can decide for yourself.